CobsWattle. My name is CobsWattle. I was found wandering along a beach. I don't have any complete memories of how I ended up there or what happened. All that was there was faces without names and a giant fire. I was wandering along the beach when I ran into a hunting party of orcs who knocked me out. They dragged me around for what felt like hours. They kept talking to one another, though no matter how hard I tried, I had no idea what they were saying. We finally reached to what I believed to be their camp. Everywhere I looked, there were slaves of all races. The only smiles came from the orcs who were whipping the slaves. The thing that scared me was there was no other turtles around, but some orcs looked as if they were holding shields made of turtle shells. So I suspected my worst fate, as the other orcs broke off from the group until all that was left was the two orcs dragging me. Eventually, they tossed me into an open cage in the middle of their camp. It's where I met a halfling bard named Von Tell, who was playing the bagpipes in the corner of the cage. I got up to try and get a better look at him, but I was weaker than I thought. So all that happened was me falling right in front of him, causing a large cloud of dust to appear. He shouted at me for a bit, causing me to retract back into my shell. Eventually, he calmed down, blew the dust out of his bagpipes, and tossed me some bread. He told me his story, about how he was traveling bard before the orcs captured him. They broke all of his instruments and burned them. He told me that the bagpipes he was using, he made himself over the past 2 years that he was there. He made it out of odds and ends he could find on the short times he could get out of the cage. He told me that playing the bagpipes was the only thing keeping him sane anymore. As I started eating the bread he tossed me, he began playing again, and it was beautiful. I eventually fell asleep listening to him play. The next morning, I woke up being kicked in my pearls by an orc, so I stood up and followed him. He started me out moving rocks and other materials that most other slaves couldn't move. As the sun began to set, the orc took me back to my cage. Von Tell was sitting in the corner and playing the bagpipes. The orc tossed in 2 pieces of bread. I picked them up and sat down in front of Von Tell, handing him his bread. Through my bites of bread, I asked him if he would teach me how to play. He said it would be hard since I was so much bigger than he was, but that he would try his best. So, day after day, we spent about an hour teaching me about the notes and tunes and a couple of songs. After about 3 years, I had all the basics down. I still couldn't play because we didn't have bagpipes big enough to fit me, but he told me I would do great when I finally got my hands on one. 1 year later, Von Tell presented to me another makeshift set of bagpipes, the same as his, but big enough to fit me. I thanked him for 2 weeks. Eventually, he told me to shut it, and I did. We would play them together for hours, sometimes dealing with an orc or two throwing rocks at us, but it didn't stop us. It never stopped us. Some days were hard for us to play. Other days we were able to play them all night. He told me about the college he went to, the College of Lore, and about the beliefs they taught there. Some days we did nothing, just watch as the orcs brought in new slaves and creatures. After a couple of weeks, I came back to the cage, but something was very different about this day. Von Tell wasn't playing when I returned. He just sat in his corner. When I sat down in front of him, I asked him what was wrong, and all he said was that it was his time to go. He put something in my hand, and when I investigated it, he put a wooden, golden-covered whistle in my hand. Inscribed on the whistle was the words, "Blow on this whistle when you feel most alone. Once you blow, you'll never be alone again." I asked him what it meant by that, but he said nothing. He had fallen still while I was reading the whistle. I didn't know how to react. My only friend for the past 5 years, gone within a couple of minutes. I stayed up all night in silence. They burned his body the next morning with no remorse or care. From there I worked harder and harder, toughening my shell and becoming the strongest slave. They started using me for combat practice. I never won a fight. I didn't have enough strength or energy to fight for more than a couple of minutes. Even if I started getting close, they gave the orc I was fighting a club or a turtle shell. Sometimes they tried to kill me. Other times they would just knock me out. They'd made me fight against other slaves and even make bets. I never lost a fight against a slave. I wasn't scared of the orcs anymore. I just knew, without a weapon, I had no chance of escaping. So for months on end, I started making an escape plan. At the end of the moon. The end of the year, when I was finally 15 and I was about to set out my plan in motion, I managed to grab a dagger during my last fight, and as soon as I killed an orc and took his hand axe, that's when the dragon landed.